What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Underdog Podcast. Today, I have my Week 3 picks for you. We will be going over every matchup today from the Week 3 slate of games that we have here. I'll be going over each matchup individually, be giving you my keys to each team for victory, and I will be going over some spreads and stuff like that, a little bit of betting here to tell you which games that I like betting, which games that I don't like betting. So without further ado, let's get into this. Let's start off with the Thursday night matchup. We have the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins. Starting off with the Buffalo Bills, who are coming off of a rout of the New York Jets on their road. I think keys for them offensively is just keep playing the same way they've been playing. I think that they won't have any problem doing that against the Miami Dolphins. Josh Allen just continues to, needs to just be himself. Continue to get the ball to Keon Coleman, Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir to keep, developing those guys into further weapons for them. James Cook needs to keep being James Cook, and that's all they really need to do on offense, in my opinion. I think this is a pretty lopsided matchup for them, to be honest with you. And then defensively, it's just, getting after Tua. I think we've seen in the first 2 weeks that if you get after him, he's going to make a mistake. He threw a boneheaded interception to lose the game against the Patriots last week. He threw a couple really bad interceptions against the Colts. So I think that would be the key for them to win this game for the Buffalo Bills. Moving on to Miami, who, just going to be honest with you, I don't think they have a chance tonight to beat the Buffalo Bills, but you never know. We'll see. I think offensively, they need to be able to establish the run game, especially against a weaker D-line against the run that the Bills have. HN needs to have a big game for tonight for them to win. And I would like to see them get Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle the ball earlier. I think that would really help them out in terms of establishing a rhythm on offense. And defensively, you had 3 pressures last week against the New England Patriots, 2 against their O-line, and 1 against Hunter Henry that Bradley Chubb had a sack on. So you need to establish some sort of pressure against a really good Bills O-line in order to have a chance in this game, and I don't think that they're going to be able to do that, but we'll see. Looking at the line for this game, it's 11.5 in favor of the Buffalo Bills, and I believe that the Bills are absolutely going to blow Miami out of the water by at least 14, if not more. So I'm taking the Buffalo Bills in this one. Moving on to an interconference matchup between 2 backup quarterbacks, we have the Minnesota Vikings and the Cincinnati Bengals. Starting off with the Minnesota Vikings here, who will be starting Carson Wentz at quarterback. They have to get started faster on offense. I think 2 slow starts have really prevented them from showing what they're capable of offensively. You won't have Aaron Jones, who's on IR with a hamstring injury, and you have to establish the run game with Jordan Mason to take the pressure off of Carson Wentz, who I'm just looking for to play point guard this week. Get the ball to Justin Jefferson as often as you can, and don't turn the football over. Defensively, Brian Flores blitzed the shit out of that O-line. That's simple as it is. This O-line for Cincinnati is not very good. Brian Flores loves to blitz. This is a really good, favorable matchup for that Vikings defense, and I want to see them get after Jake Browning, who is a more aggressive backup quarterback who likes to push the ball down the field, force him to make a couple of mistakes, and I think that you could come out of this game with a W. Moving to the Bengals side of the equation, I think that they have to establish some sort of a run game. They have not been able to do that in the first 2 weeks of the season. Chase Brown has not seen any room to run at all for them. So I think that that's the big key on offense, and Jake Browning needs to, of course, make sure that he doesn't turn the football over. He had a couple of bad interceptions last week. And then defensively, without Shamar Stewart, can you garner a pass rush against the Vikings O-line that has really struggled to start the season? Trey Hendrickson, we know that he can provide pressure. Can anybody else help him out there, though? That will be the biggest key for the Cincinnati Bengals in this one. Currently, the Minnesota Vikings are favored by 2.5 at home, and I like them to win this game. I just think that they have the better matchup, especially their defense going up against Cincinnati's offense. I like that matchup for the Vikings, and I think that they're going to get it done here. It will be a closer game. Might be an ugly one, but I think the Vikings get it done at home. Moving on into our premier matchup of the 1 o'clock slate, in my opinion, we have the Philadelphia Eagles and the Los Angeles Rams. Starting off with Philly, who got a road victory against the Kansas City Chiefs in a tight one there. You have to establish some sort of, passing game. They haven't been able to do that in the first 2 weeks of the season. You have to get your premier weapons in Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown involved in this passing game. even though they're such a good team at running the football and you can always fall back on that, you do need some sort of a balance to win in the National Football League, and the Eagles need to establish that this week against the Rams if they want to continue to be that number one team in the league, and they've shown over the course of the last year or so. And I think defensively, the Rams have also really struggled with pass pro. We've kind of talked about that with a couple of teams. I think the Eagles have the D-line to get after them this week. You need Jalen Carter. You need Nolan Smith to get after it, as they have, in the first 2 weeks of the season when Jalen Carter's on the field not spitting in dudes' faces. So I think that's Philly's key, and that'll take some pressure off their secondary that's kind of struggled to start the season. So I think that would be the key defensively for the Philadelphia Eagles. Moving on to the Los Angeles Rams, who are picking up a double-digit victory on the road against the Tennessee Titans. I would love to see them get Kyron Williams going. I think that they got Devontae Adams going last week, and that's good, and Puka's been on fire to start the season. But Kyron's really the one guy that's kind of lacked. I think if you can get him involved in this game, I think that bodes well for you, especially because Philly likes to run the ball. If you can establish some ball control on offense, that would be essential for you. And then I think in terms of the Rams, defensive keys is, can you slow down this run game at all with Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts and force Jalen Hurts to beat you as a passer and then tee off on him with Jared Verse and the boys out there, as a pass rush? I think that's the biggest key for the Rams in this one. Philly's currently favored by 3.5 at home, which is, that's a tough spread. It's a tough one to bet on. I would stay away from this game. I'm going to take the Rams to beat the Eagles on the road and stay 3-0 in a battle of currently 2-0 teams. I like the Rams this week as an upset on the road against the Philadelphia Eagles. Moving on to an interdivision matchup in the NFC South, we have the Carolina Panthers versus the Atlanta Falcons. Carolina Panthers fought back in the second half against the Arizona Cardinals, but came up short on the road. My keys for this game is get a faster, rhythm on offense. I want to see them play with a little bit more tempo, get some easy completions for Bryce Young, get Chuba Hubbard involved. Ted McMillan had a really good game last week. I think they can build off that, get him involved. And can you get anything out of Xavier Legette this week? I also think pass protection is going to be a big key. Missing Austin Corbett, who went down with a knee injury, and losing Robert Hunt for the season with a torn bicep is going to be really tough, especially against a Falcons pass rush that has looked revived over the last 2 weeks of the season. So I think that those are the big keys on offense for Carolina. And then defensively, can you at all slow down this premier run game that the Atlanta Falcons have? Derek Brown's going to be at the center of that. He's a really good run defender. He's got to be able to step up for this Carolina team to make them, more so of a pass-centric offense this week than a run-centric offense. And then Atlanta, who's coming off a huge win in Minnesota over the Minnesota Vikings. I think they still have to lean into their philosophy of running the football. Bijan Robinson and Ty Algier gave the Vikings fits. If they can continue to do that, they're going to have no problem, against this Carolina Panthers team. And then defensively, continue what we've seen from them as a pass rush, especially with this weaker Panthers O-line, losing 2 starters last week due to injury. I think that they can have success here in the pass rushing game with Jalen Walker, with James Pierce, with the rest of their D-line that they have. Atlanta is currently a 5.5-point favorite on the road. I like them to win and cover in this game against Carolina. Moving on to another interconference matchup, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New York Jets. Starting off at Tampa Bay, who had a big game-winning drive led by Baker Mayfield over the Houston Texans on the road, picking up a big win, going to 2-0. It's going to be the pass protection, especially with not having Tristan Wirfs at all this season so far. They just lost Cody Mauch to a season-ending knee injury, and Luke Goedeke just got placed on IR with a foot injury. Can they, protect Baker against a pretty good Jets pass rush? That will be the biggest question. They struggled against Houston in the pass protection department, so can they continue to keep guys off of Baker Mayfield this week against the New York Jets. And then defensively, I think stopping the run is going to be a big key here. If you can stop Breece Hall and Braylon Allen from really, establishing a run game and make Tyrod Taylor beat you, that's going to be, ever in the Bucs' favor to accomplish that this week at home. And then the Jets, who got, routed by the Buffalo Bills at home, going on the road this week against a tough Tampa Bay Buccaneers team without Justin Fields, who is out due to a concussion. You have to establish the run in this football game if you're going to have any shot. You need to get Breece Hall and Braylon Allen going. They had a lot of success against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Can they get back to what they were doing in Week 1 and not Week 2, where they couldn't really do anything on offense against the Buffalo Bills? And then defensively, pass rush. Jermaine Johnson, Will McDonald, Quinnen Williams, can you get after the quarterback? With a weakened O-line that the Bucs have, losing 3 guys due to injury here. Tampa's favored by a touchdown at home. I like them winning by at least 10 points at home here against the New York Jets. Moving on to our next matchup, we have another interdivision matchup here in the AFC South with the Tennessee Titans and the Indianapolis Colts. Starting off with the Titans, who lost at home against the Los Angeles Rams. I think their key on offense is they're going to have to take some pressure off of Cam Ward. He can't be their entire offense. They have to establish the run, which they haven't gotten Tony Pollard going in the first 2 weeks of the season. And, in order to be a more efficient offense, I believe that they have to do that. And then defensively, lean into your strength, your defensive line. They have really kept you in both of these games against Denver and Los Angeles back-to-back weeks to start the season. If they can do that again, then they have a shot of winning this football game. It starts up front with defending the run against Jonathan Taylor, who had a huge game for the Colts last week. If you can get after Daniel Jones and force him to make mistakes, then you have an opportunity to win this football game. Looking at the Indianapolis Colts side of things, who had a big home victory against the Denver Broncos on a last-second field goal kick, I think you just have to continue to be an efficient offense. Jonathan Taylor had a huge game for them last week. They need to continue to run the ball well. They didn't do that very well against Miami. They kind of bounced back against Denver. Can they continue that success that they had last week? And Daniel Jones just needs to continue to be efficient. Get the ball to Michael Pittman and Josh Downs, consistently, and then hitting Alec Pierce over the top, I think is, the big key for them. And then, if Indianapolis can stop the run and, force Tennessee to be a pass-centric team, which has really happened over the last 2 weeks, I think you're going to find success in this football game for Indianapolis. Looking at the line for this game, Indy's favored by 4.5 on the road. I think this is going to be a closer game than people think, especially these AFC South matchups. They typically are really wild. I still have Indy winning this game, and I think they're going to cover, but I don't think it's going to be by more than a touchdown against the Tennessee Titans. Moving on to our next matchup, we have a good old-fashioned matchup here between the New England Patriots and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Starting off with my New England Patriots, who got a big-time road win against the Miami Dolphins, first one of the year. I think if the O-line can continue to play like they did against Miami, keep the pressure off of Drake May, who was awesome against the Miami Dolphins, played his best game of his young pro career. He was super efficient and consistent, which we've been asking for in the amount of time that he has started. And if they can continue to establish the run game for the trio of running backs that they did last week, which Pittsburgh has struggled to stop the run, I think that's going to be a big success for them. And then defensively, with or without Christian Gonzalez, they have to play better, against the pass. Carlton Davis looked pretty good last week. Alex Austin gave up 158 yards through the air. That's just unacceptable as a starting quarter in the National Football League. So they have to be better against the pass. They gave up 300 passing yards to Geno Smith in Week 1, and they gave up a lot of passing yards to Tua in Week 2. So I think they need to be better in that regard. Looking at the Steelers side of things, who are coming off of a home loss to the Seattle Seahawks, they have to establish the run in some sort of way. They have not been able to do that at all this season. And, as much as I like Jaylen Warren as a dynamic weapon out of the passing game, I think that they have to give Caleb Johnson the opportunity to, get some carries this week and establish the run game for Pittsburgh. That's why they drafted him in the 3rd round. And then I think defensively, they just have to elevate their game. They're a much better defense than what they've put out on tape over the last 2 weeks. It starts with TJ Watt, who hasn't been the guy that we've been accustomed to. He needs to get going against the Patriots if they're going to have a shot this week, to kind of get back on track. And this is a really big game for both of these teams who are fighting for most likely a wild card spot, at the end of the season. Looking at the line for this game, Pittsburgh is favored by 1.5 on the road, but I'm fading Pittsburgh. I'm going with the New England Patriots to win at home by a touchdown. I think I saw some really good things from them offensively last week. I think that continues this week against Pittsburgh, and I think they get it done by a touchdown at home. Moving on to another interconference matchup, we have the Washington Commanders against the Las Vegas Raiders, both of these teams coming off of primetime losses. Starting off with the Commanders, who lost at Lambeau Field to the Green Bay Packers. They're probably going to be without Jaden Daniels this week, who sprained his knee in that matchup and has not practiced for the last 2 days. So I think for the Commanders, establishing balance is going to be the key. They really, they had a really good week running the football in week 1 and didn't really pass the ball that well, and were kind of the opposite in week 2. So I think establishing the balance, especially if you're going to have Marcus Mariota at quarterback, I think that's going to be a key, getting the run game going and taking the pressure off of Mariota. And then I think defensively they had a decent amount of success rushing the passer, and we saw that Geno was affected by the pressure that the Chargers got last week. So I think getting some pressure on Geno Smith, forcing him to make some mistakes that he did last week against the Chargers, I think will benefit the Commanders in this matchup against the Raiders. And then looking at the Raiders side of things, coming off a loss against the Chargers on Monday Night Football, I think you have to establish the run game. That's why you drafted Ashton Genty, because this run game was absolutely abysmal last season. They need to find success in the run game to take pressure off of Geno in that passing game in order to win this football game. And I think defensively, they got to get after Marcus Mariota pass rushing. Max Crosby, Tyree Wilson, and the boys up front need to establish themselves early and often in that football game in order to have the desired success against the Washington Commanders. Looking at this one, it's really interesting. The Commanders are still favored by 3.5 here. I believe the Raiders' odds are like plus 155. So if you're betting, I would take the Raiders here, because I'm going to pick them to win this game. I think that it's kind of insane that they're still not favored in this game, but I think that the Raiders are going to end up winning this football game here on the road against the Washington Commanders. Moving on to another interconference matchup, we have the Cleveland Browns and the Green Bay Packers. Starting with the Browns, who got massacred at home by the Baltimore Ravens. I think surviving this football game is going to be your priority number one. But in order to win this football game, you're going to have to establish a ball control offense. You're going to need to establish a run game to keep the ball out of Jordan Love's hands, keep the ball out of the Packers, offense, keep them on the sideline. In order to win this football game, establishing the run game with a Jerome Ford, a Quinshon Judkins, Dylan Sampson, whoever it is, and Joe Flacco can't turn the ball over in order to win this matchup. And defensively, you got to make this a slugfest. Myles Garrett and the boys back there, they need to make this game a slugfest in order to, have a chance at this one. Similar to what they did against Cincinnati, where they just, came up a little bit short because their kicker, missed a field goal to potentially win that game. And then looking at Green Bay's side of things, it's continuing to do what you were doing on offense. Don't make mistakes. Establish the run game. I'd like to see them get Matthew Golden more involved in this game against Cleveland. I think that he can be a really dynamic weapon for them, and they tried that. Love missed him a couple times. I think, avoiding that will benefit Green Bay. And then defensively, Jeff Hafley just continuing to shuffle this defensive line around, put them in unique positions to, win in the pass rush and, continue to use exotic blitzes and stunts to, get after, the Cleveland Browns this week. Green Bay's favored by 7.5 on the road. I like them to win by at least 10 on the road against Cleveland. And then wrapping up our 1 o'clock slate, we have another interdivisional matchup in the AFC South between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Houston Texans. I think the Jags, who are coming off a brutal loss against the Bengals on the road, it was definitely a winnable game that they should have won. I think establishing chemistry between Trevor Lawrence, Brian Thomas Jr., and Travis Hunter is going to be a big key. For whatever reason, they're just not on the same page. BTJ just didn't look like he trusted Trevor Lawrence with those over-the-middle throws and was making business decisions out there. So I think reestablishing that chemistry needs to be a priority, and I think getting the ball to Travis Hunter more needs to be a priority for sure. And then defensively, Josh Hines-Allen needs to be unleashed. I mean, it's a mismatch with him at Arante Ursary. I expect 6-7 pressures from him. And Trayvon Walker on the other side against Titus Howard should find success as well. If you can get after C.J. Stroud, they've struggled against, good pass rushes this season, the Texans have. So I think that will bring them success. And then looking at Houston, who's coming off of a, heartbreaking loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Monday Night Football at home, I would say that for starters, C.J. Stroud has to play better. He hasn't lived up to the billing that he's established over his first 2 years in the league. He has to play better football, and I want to see these rookie weapons get more involved in the game. Jalen Noel had a huge punt return for this team that set up a field goal to cut the lead, and that was their biggest play of the game. And their second biggest play of the game was a Jaden Higgins run after the catch, and that was his first catch of the game in the fourth quarter, and it set up, that touchdown to Nick Chubb, I believe. So I would like to see these Iowa State boys, as an Iowa State fan, get more involved in the game. And I think defensively, you have to cause fits with Trevor Lawrence, who's proved to be an inaccurate quarterback over these first 2 weeks of the season, in order to really, affect his game and to try and force a couple turnovers for the Houston Texans there. This is the game that I am least confident in picking. It is essentially a pick 'em. They have Jacksonville favored by 1.5 this week. I think this is Houston's get-right game. If they don't win this one, I think they're going to be in big-time trouble against the Indianapolis Colts for the division lead. So I'm going to go with the Houston Texans here on the road against Jacksonville. Moving on to our afternoon slate, we're starting with the Seattle Seahawks and the New Orleans Saints. As far as Seattle's concerned, I think taking advantage of this really poor pass rush from the New Orleans Saints, who have the worst pressure rate in the league. I think it's under 13% right now. If they can, bully them and give Sam Darnold the time to distribute the ball to his targets, I think they're going to have success on offense here. And then I think the key matchup is Mike McDonald versus Kellen Moore. And I think McDonald has the advantage in that because he has the better personnel, but I would like to see them win that matchup. I think that they have, the upper hand, especially in the secondary. I like their matchup against Olave and Rashid Shaheed. I think they have the athletes to play, on that back end. I think, containing Kamara is going to be a big key for them in this football game. Moving on to the New Orleans Saints side of things, who are coming off a close home loss against the 49ers in a game that Spencer Rattler played pretty good in. Just saying. Do we have a future starter for the New Orleans Saints there in Spencer Rattler? Maybe it wasn't a fluke that he beat Chuck in the quarterback competition there, but I want to see Kellen Moore really take the training wheels off this offense, take some more shots down the field, especially with Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave. It fits their skill sets more, and continuing to get Alvin Kamara involved in this game. And, can you get any pass rush in this game defensively against a weaker offensive line in that the Seahawks have? I doubt that's going to happen, but, I'd like to see them, get a little bit more pressure against a weaker O-line in the Seattle Seahawks. Seahawks are currently favored by 7.5 at home, and I like them to win this game by at least 10 points over the New Orleans Saints. Moving on to our next afternoon matchup, we have the San Francisco 49ers against the Arizona Cardinals in a NFC West matchup here. Starting off with the 49ers, I think that Mac Jones needed to take less sacks. He took 3 sacks against the New Orleans Saints. I think that against a better D-line in the Arizona Cardinals, he's going to face a little bit more pressure, and he can't be taking as many sacks. I think that is the big key for them offensively in this one. And defensively, it's tackling. They missed a lot of tackles other than Fred Warner against the Saints, and the Cardinals have guys that can make you miss out in open space, and you know that James Conner's a bruiser. He's going to run you over. So I think tackling is the big key here for San Francisco 49ers. It's a little bit of the little things here against the Cardinals in a tightly contested matchup here. As far as the Cardinals, it's going to be really simple. It's playing 60 minutes of football throughout the entire game. If they do that, I think that they are the better team in this matchup with the injuries that San Francisco has. I think it's just a question of if they can do it. I think that the Cardinals are favored in this matchup if they can do that. But looking at the line for this game, San Francisco's a 2.5-point favorite at home, but I'm going to take the underdogs in the Arizona Cardinals to win on the road. All right. Moving on to our next matchup, we have the Los Angeles Chargers and the Denver Broncos, another interdivision matchup, this time in the AFC West. Starting off with the Chargers, who had a good victory over the Las Vegas Raiders at home on Monday Night Football. Or maybe it was on the road. On the road. Yeah, sorry, on the road. It was at Vegas. I think that the biggest key for them offensively is establishing the run. Justin Herbert has had a great start to the year, but they drafted Amarian Hampton in the first round for a reason, and I think that they really need to lean into this run game. I know that they're not as equipped as they'd like to be for it, but I think that getting that going this week would be, beneficial, especially with the game that Jonathan Taylor had last week. I think he had 158 rushing yards. This is the week to get Amarian Hampton going. And I think defensively, with the loss of Khalil Mack, can you establish a pass rush against a really good pass-protecting O-line that the Denver Broncos have? Because when Bo Nix gets under pressure, he gets really skittish, and he hasn't played well under pressure through the first 2 weeks of the NFL season. I think that's the biggest key for the Chargers this week. On the Broncos side of things, I would like to see them develop more of a down-the-field passing attack. Bo Nix's ADOT in the game on Sunday against the Colts was 5.4 yards. That's just not going to cut it. They have the guys to do it. Cortland Sutton's a really, really good contested catch threat. Troy Franklin's got some speed. Marvin Mims has speed to get vertical. I'd like to see them do that on offense. And defensively, it's can you get after Justin Herbert? Nick Bonito has the highest pass rush win rate for any edge rusher to start this season at like 33.5%. He needs to continue that. You got Zach Allen, you got Jonathan Cooper. You need to get after Justin Herbert in this matchup. Chargers are favored by 2.5. I'm going to take them at home to win this game. It's another game that I'm not as confident in picking, but I'm going to take the Chargers at home. They've played better of the two teams to start the season, and I expect them to continue that and go to 3-0. Our last game for the afternoon slate, we have the Chicago Bears and the Dallas Cowboys. So looking at it, the Chicago Bears, who got pummeled, no other way to put it, by the Detroit Lions. I want to see them come out in a rhythm. I think that's the biggest thing for me. Come out in a rhythm against the Dallas Cowboys. They did that against the Minnesota Vikings. They had some success offensively. Get some easy completions for Caleb Williams, establish the run game with DeAndre Swift. I think that it would be beneficial for them to come out in a nice rhythm offensively in order to, have success against the Dallas Cowboys. Defensively, it's protecting the secondary. Pass rush needs to get after it because Jalen Johnson's going to miss the entire year with a groin injury, more than likely. Kyler Gordon hasn't played at all this season yet. I don't know if he's going to play on Sunday against the Cowboys. That's going to be their big key, is preventing those big plays against, CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. Offensively for Dallas, I think I'd like to see them continue to establish that run game, which I thought they weren't going to be able to do this season. Javonte Williams has looked pretty good. Mix in Miles Sanders when need be. Take some pressure off Dak in that passing game, because when Dak has to pass the ball it hasn't resulted in a ton of success for them. And then defensively, I think if you can slow down the run game, which shouldn't be that hard because DeAndre Swift's vision might do that, on its own, but, force Caleb to really kind of be the engine of this offense and, put some pressure on him, force him to lean into the inaccuracy that he's shown over the first 2 weeks of the season, I think could benefit Dallas. This is another pick 'em game. It's a really tough one for me to pick. I really wanted to go Chicago, but I'm going to go with Dallas on the road to beat the Chicago Bears to improve to 2-1 on the season. Going to our Sunday night matchup, we have the New York Giants and the Kansas City Chiefs, a pair of 0-2 teams. Never thought I would say that about the Kansas City Chiefs, but here we are in 2025 where they're 0-2. And for the Giants, I think keys offensively is continue to do what you did last week. Lean into Russell Wilson's ability as a deep ball thrower. Get Malik Neighbors involved. He had a hell of a game last week. I think that he was awesome. And Wan'Dale Robinson had a lot of opportunities for run after the catch. Need to continue to do that for him. And Darius Slayton's another guy who can, separate vertically. And make Cam Skattebo your primary guy running the football. Enough of Tyrone Tracy. Make him the change-up third down back. That's fine. But Cam Skattebo was running over dudes in Dallas. They need to continue to establish that here. And then defensively, Shane Bowen. Unleash this D-line. Felt like they haven't really lived up to their potential. Especially last week, I think they were a little bit better against the Commanders. But, dial some stuff up for Abdul Carter and Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau. Really lean into this week against the Chiefs. Speaking of the Chiefs, offensively, need to establish a run game. Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco haven't really established that. This season, I think you doing that, takes pressure off Mahomes to make every single play for this offense. And then defensively, I think it's, similar to the Giants. They need to establish a pass rush here. Chris Jones has not lived up to the billing in the first 2 weeks that he has, the bar that he has set for himself. And George Karlaftis has not been, kind of that Robin to, Chris Jones is Batman. And then anything you get from any of those other guys is house money. This is an interesting game here. I think that, the Chiefs being favored by 5.5 is very interesting. A lot of people are going to be picking the Chiefs, but not me, man. I'm going to pick the Giants at home to get their first win of the year and the Chiefs to fall to 0-3. I'm picking the Giants as a dog at home. I like the matchup with them against the Chiefs in order to get this one done. Moving on to our final matchup here, we have the Baltimore Ravens and the Detroit Lions. Starting off with the Ravens side of things, I think that the biggest key for them is reestablishing their identity as a run-first team. They couldn't really run the football against the Cleveland Browns at all, and I think that they need to reestablish that here. Derrick Henry couldn't get going at all. I think that that's a big key for them. And then on the defensive end of the ball, I think the secondary is the biggest issue. They have to account for Jameson Williams as a big play threat, throw up some of those against the Buffalo Bills. I think that they need to, make sure that they account for him at all times. And Kyle Hamilton versus Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be the matchup of the game, in my opinion. And then moving over to the Detroit Lions side of things, I think that in terms of offensively, run game is the big thing for them. I think that when they could run the ball with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery against the Bears, they were really, really good. And against the Packers, when they couldn't, they were really, really bad. So I think that that's going to be the big key for them. And I think defensively, it's keeping Lamar in the pocket, making sure that he's not doing his Houdini act that he loves to do. I think that, you got to keep him in the pocket, keep him from extending plays and making a big-time throw to Zay Flowers or DeAndre Hopkins, or making a big run with his feet there. And then looking at the line for this game, it's higher than I would have expected, especially after the result that Detroit kind of gave to Chicago. It is a 5.5-point favorite for the Ravens. I think that the Lions cover that, but I'm going to take the Ravens to win this football game, reestablish themselves as a perennial, kind of Super Bowl threat. I think that they, kind of let the Bills off the hook a little bit. I think they're going to establish themselves as the second best football team in the NFL this year with that Monday night performance against the Detroit Lions. And with that, that's all I have for you in my Week 3 picks. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. I want to know what you agreed with and disagree with. Let me know down there in the comments. As always, if you like the content, make sure you like and subscribe. I will be back again tomorrow with a quiz for y'all, so make sure you tune into that. And then I will be back again on Tuesday with my Week 4 Power Rankings, so make sure you stay tuned to that. As always, everybody, enjoy the game tonight. Hopefully it's a better game than I'm making it out to be between the Bills and the Dolphins. But as always, I'll see you tomorrow night with a quiz, and have a wonderful day, everybody, and peace. Okay, hopefully that recorded